2,500 years ago, a new technology forced humanity to create entirely new ways of understanding existence. Today, AI is triggering the exact same pattern. What ancient wisdom tells us about surviving this transformation could be crucial for our future.
Throughout history, great transformations have reshaped civilization itself. Now we stand at the dawn of perhaps humanity's greatest change. I'm Evan Goldstein, and in this series, Echoes of Tomorrow, we'll explore how the patterns of the past illuminate the path ahead, as artificial intelligence transforms our world in ways our ancestors never could have imagined.
This is part 2 of a 2-part series. In our previous episode, we explored the remarkable period known as the Axial Age, when great philosophical traditions emerged simultaneously across ancient civilizations at around 500 BCE. That first video focused more on the historical context of the Axial Age across Greece, India, and China, examining how the invention of coinage transformed not just economies, but philosophical thinking. We explored figures like Buddha and Confucius and Socrates, and how their revolutionary ideas emerged during periods of social upheaval and technological change. I think there are still some important ideas to explore here, so I'm making this second video which focuses more on the spiritual and religious transformations that occurred during this period. In particular, I want to examine how societies developed new belief systems when old religions no longer adequately explain their changing world, and what this means for us as AI challenges our understanding of consciousness, intelligence, and human purpose. These concepts are crucial to understand because just as coinage changed how people related to each other and to abstract concepts like value, AI is fundamentally changing our relationship to knowledge, to creativity, and even to meaning itself. We'll explore how ancient societies ultimately adapted to their technological revolution and what lessons we might learn as we face our own. Welcome to part 2 of our exploration of hidden ancient revolution that perfectly explains modern AI. The Axial Age occurred in history around 500 BCE. It's a time when famous names like Buddha, Laozi, Confucius, and Socrates were all creating our modern patterns of thought on the planet, and it was all happening at the same time. At first, I thought about doing a whole video on how world religions began, so let's talk about how world religions usually break down into 2 main categories. There are those with more than 100 million followers, or even 500 million. Hinduism, the Abrahamic religions, and those Axial Age belief systems. Almost every major religion fits into one of these groups. Now, speaking of the Abrahamics, they include Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which all sprang up in the same neck of the woods. Think Israel and Arabia. Now, the interesting thing about the Axial Age religions is that they all started at around the same time when the people I mentioned were alive. Well, one key takeaway from my history studies is that sometimes totally disconnected societies end up having very similar experiences. A book written by Victor Lieberman dives into this. It shows how the political history of Southeast Asia and Western Europe developed in synchronicity. They ended up forming unified nations, they had their civil wars, and they built bureaucratic empires, and they saw great conquerors rise all at around the same time. Lieberman even took this idea further in a sequel covering all of Eurasia, highlighting how these distant societies often go through similar changes simultaneously. Axial Age fits right into this narrative. Back in 500 BC, China had no clue that there were other civilizations out there. India was aware, but wasn't politically engaged with neighboring societies yet. Still, all of these cultures hit their religious revolutions at the same time, and it's for reasons that we're going to explore today. Now, this brings us to today and to our current AI revolution. Just like those ancient civilizations figured out new philosophies to deal with the technological changes they face, like coinage, we're seeing different countries come up with their own plans for AI governance. China's approach is really different from what's happening in the West. It's a bit like when those ancient cultures discovered that they weren't alone. Humanity is now navigating the waters of dealing with this new and truly alien intelligence that we've created. How China handled the realization of other civilizations back then might give us a sneak peek into how we're going to adapt to sharing our world with artificial minds. And if you're getting value from this episode, I'd appreciate it if you push the like button. Pressing like lets me know I'm making content you want to see, and it spreads that content to others. Thank you for supporting AI Capitalist. So, let's take a moment to explore the world leading up to 500 BC. Now, during this time, urban societies were bustling, and they were making significant strides in literacy and in culture. However, many histories tend to leap straight into the Axial Age without giving enough attention to what came before. If you dive into historical accounts of the Middle East or India or China, you might notice that they often overlook crucial developments and they jump right into the Axial Age between 1000 and 500 BCE, particularly outside the Middle East. There aren't a lot of well-documented events from that time that stand out. In the Middle East, though, we see important developments like the rise of Judaism and the Assyrian Empire. Now, this 500-year stretch, starting at 1000 BCE, was considered the Bronze Dark Ages. But don't be fooled. This era was a time when civilization really began to take shape with the emergence of cities and intricate trade systems. So as we look for parallels between their time and today, we should bear in mind that today's AI revolution also follows a long period of technological groundwork. Just like the ancient world needed to develop writing and urbanization and basic economic systems before the Axial Age could emerge, our AI revolution required the development of computing and the internet and big data infrastructure. We're now at a similar inflection point where these foundational technologies are enabling a transformative leap. From a capitalist perspective, both periods represent moments when accumulated technological capacity suddenly enables revolutionary change. This pattern is identified as a characteristic of a pre-crisis phase. The major breakthrough that totally lines up with the Axial Age across the world is the invention of coinage. By that time, the four big civilizations were already on the scene: the Middle East, Europe, India, and China. The Middle East didn't have an Axial Age prophet except for the Zoroaster, which we'll touch on later. The thing is, the Middle East didn't introduce coins, and that's a big reason why it missed out on having its own Axial Age prophet. Now, this whole situation ties into why Alexander the Great was such a well-known person. Many people know that he and a few Greeks managed to conquer the entire Middle East in just 10 years. A big part of their achievement, aside from being more organized and united than the locals, was that the Greeks had a market economy while the Middle East did not. For a long time, the Middle East was ground zero for civilization. But starting around 3000 BC, it was home to several distinct civilizations like the Egyptians, Canaanites, the Jews, the Persians, the Elamites, the Armenians, Assyrians, and more. Most of these societies were theocracies. The challenge with theocracies is that sometimes priests can unintentionally hold society back. Instead of fostering new ideas or creativity, certain priestly classes ended up becoming stagnant, almost like social parasites. The pattern of religion losing its spark is something that we'll see throughout the Axial Age as we explore Greece, India, and China. In India, there's an insightful saying that highlights the issue. The priests act as if the gods serve them. Religion in these societies became commoditized, where faith felt more transactional. It's reminiscent of pre-Reformation days in Europe when the Catholic Church had a practice of allowing people to essentially pay for a ticket to heaven. People would give money, and in return the church would pray for them to secure their place in the afterlife. Over time, religion turned into something that felt more like Lucky Charms, where people would pay a priest for blessings, whether it was for marrying or starting a new venture or healing their children from sickness. The challenge of rigid institutional control in ancient theocracies parallels today's concerns about controlling AI. Just as religious institutions monopolized access to divine knowledge, there are fears that large tech corporations could monopolize AI capabilities. This raises fundamental questions about capitalism, whether centralized control of transformative technologies inevitably leads to stagnation, as it did with the priestly classes. Now, the Jewish concept of separation of political and religious authority, as seen in the relationship between kings and prophets, might offer some insights into how to balance corporate AI development with public interest. Atheism and agnosticism may seem like new ideas, but they actually have some pretty fascinating historical roots that stretch back thousands of years. A lot of people who are hardcore atheists or agnostics today, if you ask them what their religion is, they'll say, oh, I'm a secular humanist, which of course is just a non-theistic religion. It has all the same properties of a religion, including the schisms and factions and so on. What do people mean when they say that they're spiritual but not religious? Often what they mean is that they don't adhere to any of the organized religions, or that they don't go to church or temple or mosque or anything like that. They don't consider themselves a member of any organized religion, but they still do have some sort of personal, spiritual, or philosophical outlook on life. I find it fascinating how this belief mirrors what was happening in the run-up to the Axial Age. Just like in the Axial Age, where traditional beliefs were challenged by new technologies and societal changes, we're seeing a similar trend today. Religions have a cyclical nature, with old ones fading and new ones emerging, or old ones re-emerging, reborn, after a period of reform and rebuilding. These new or renewed faiths fulfill some of the same fundamental human needs for belief and purpose. Even those who identify as atheists or agnostics might still find community and meaning in secular belief systems like human. As AI transforms our world, we might see the rise of new belief systems or the evolution of existing ones to accommodate our changing understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and of existence itself. While technology might change, our core human needs for meaning, for connection, remain constant. We must be prepared to embrace new ways of thinking and to find meaning in a world that's increasingly shaped by artificial intelligence. In the same way that AI and other advanced technologies reshape our world, we may find ourselves questioning our existing beliefs and seeking new sources of meaning and purpose. Now, this could lead to the rise of new belief systems or the adaptation of existing ones to better reflect our changing understanding of the universe and of our place within it. This episode's exploration of secular spirituality and the search for meaning outside of organized religion is a reflection of this ongoing process. It highlights the human need for something to believe in, even in the absence of traditional religious ideas. This is a valuable lesson from the Axial Age. It reminds us that even as technology advances and our understanding of the world evolves, human spirit is going to continue to seek connection, meaning, and purpose, especially to the divine. The ancient Greeks and Romans were already familiar with these concepts, and even in medieval Italy, voices of atheism were heard. So what drives atheism? It usually springs up when there's a noticeable gap between how advanced society becomes and between the beliefs that society's religion is promoting. As societies progress faster than the religious structures can adapt, people naturally start to question their faith. It's not necessarily about not believing in God. It more reflects a feeling that the version of God portrayed by society doesn't resonate with them. Now, fast forward to today, and we see the rapid development of artificial intelligence creating a similar gap between our time-tested institutions and the fast-paced technological world that we live in. Just like those ancient priests who struggled to adapt to new economic realities, many modern institutions are finding it challenging to keep up with this AI-driven landscape. This situation brings to mind Peter Turchin's idea of late stagflation at the end of a secular cycle, which hints that we might be on the verge of some significant societal changes. From a capitalist perspective, AI is shaping up the traditional market dynamics. It has the power to analyze data and to predict outcomes in ways that we humans just cannot do. This prompts us to reassess our economic frameworks, much like ancient societies had to rethink their religious beliefs. If we lean too far into nihilism, losing our beliefs and sense of purpose, things can take a turn for the worse. A lack of shared values can lead to social unrest, inequality, and conflicts. History teaches us that nearly every society has embraced some form of religion, indicating that it fulfills a fundamental human need. Without it, we could create an environment where negative social dynamics thrive. The current AI revolution is challenging our traditional belief systems and our societal structures. Just as ancient cultures struggled to transition from local gods to universal principles, we're navigating a shift from a human-centric view to a potential post-human mode of intelligence and organization. Now, this resonates with Neil Howe's concept of an awakening period, where old certainties are put to the test. Economically, artificial intelligence is pushing us to rethink fundamental capitalist assumptions about human labor, about value creation, and about market efficiency. In the past, people often worshiped local spirits, like the ones of a nearby creek, imagining that honoring these natural elements, such as rivers or trees, was essential to their way of life. Different cultures had their own sets of local gods. For instance, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, and Greeks each had their own unique deities. However, when giant empires like the Persian Empire came into play, everything changed. Imagine an empire stretching further than the distance from Alaska to Greenland, bringing together many cultures and religions. It was easy to stick with your known beliefs when you weren't exposed to anything else. But as soldiers or merchants traveled and engaged with different local people in different villages, they encountered a wide array of diverse beliefs, like the Syrians with their gods and the Persians with theirs. This diversity made it very challenging to maintain faith in their own local god. Nowadays, deep learning systems are somewhat like those ancient mathematical discoveries. They uncover surprising patterns and realities that often go beyond what we can instinctively grasp. There's something almost mystical about AI's ability to solve problems that are beyond human understanding, which is echoing how Greeks saw mathematics as a gateway to divine truth. Now, this offers some insights for capitalism. As artificial intelligence begins to make decisions based on patterns and data that we can't easily see, this potentially introduces a new brand of mathematical mysticism into how our markets operate and flow. Now, the Axial Age shares some other intriguing similarities with our current time. Because as we navigate a world rich in diversity, many people find it challenging to reconcile their beliefs and their faith, especially when confronted with the variations in other faiths, like how Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims can each hold different views. Now, if you think back just 300 years ago, meeting someone from a different religion would have been an incredibly rare event. Another interesting parallel is how our traditional religions, especially those from before the Industrial Age, often revolve around stories of agricultural life. For instance, Jesus spoke about familiar themes like sheep and rivers and the relationship between fathers and sons, elements that were central to daily life back then, but in our industrialized world, we sometimes struggle to connect these narratives with our own modern experiences. Now, this leads to some compelling questions. How does Christianity align with scientific understanding? How does it integrate with technology and the complexities of today's employer-employee dynamics? And that doesn't even bring up modern dating. Since many traditional religions don't have clear answer to these new challenges, it's understandable why we've observed a decline in religious observance over the past few centuries. The need for fresh ideas in faith today feels a lot like what people experienced during the Axial Age, a time when many people struggled to find faith in their traditional beliefs. And what's revealing is to dig into the historical records from that time. It's amazing to think that 3,000 years ago, people were grappling with the same questions that we see in our lives today. Take, for instance, the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. While he lived a bit after this period, he was bold in his attempts to replace the old gods with the worship of the sun as a singular divine being. This highlights how long the quest for unified belief has been around, as people sought to create a single god, or to imagine or believe in a single god that could encapsulate all of their local deities amidst their growing skepticism. Now, looking back at this time reveals that various civilizations found their own unique solutions. They often remained polytheistic, but they adopted philosophical frameworks that helped them embrace multiple gods in a more cohesive and holistic way. It's interesting to think about how societies seem to crave some form of religion, because when one belief system fades away, another one just rises to take its place. I mean, look at communism. It fits so many definitions of religion, even though it doesn't involve the concept of God. And remember, you don't actually have to believe in God to have a religion. Just think about Buddhism and Confucianism, which don't center around a deity. There's a curious twist in our times when the idea that placing religion can become a kind of belief in itself. Those who feel that faith isn't necessary can often be the most passionate advocates for that perspective, which is kind of the irony of it. It suggests that even the conviction against needing faith points to a deeper human desire for faith. Looking ahead, we might witness a revival of traditional religions as they adapt to modern life. Think about Hinduism and its evolution during the Axial Age, or we could see entirely new belief systems emerge. I believe that both scenarios are likely over the coming centuries. Now, the intriguing question is, how long will it take? It might not be something that unfolds for another 400 years. The West has certainly faced a slowdown in religious adherence for a long time. And while we have seen attempts at new religions, many of those efforts, like those from the Axial Age, haven't found lasting success. The science that we have in a century is not the science that we have now. Most people's conception of science is not actually what science says. String theory is absolutely bizarre, and no one has tried to integrate string theory into a sort of unified theory of physics. One of my favorite authors, Amore Adrianacourt, during the 1950s predicted a new religion would develop in the 21st century that would be a combination of Hinduism and string theory. I think it's fascinating because he said that there are very strong parallels between them. And we know Indians love science. Now I can see that developing. You have to develop a new worldview that's consistent with science. But if you look at communism, it was consistent with the science of 200 years ago. But that science was completely wrong, just like communism. The science back then said that everyone was equal, genetics did not impact the world, that humanity is a blank slate where you can socialize and believe whatever you're programmed to. And that was the scientific consensus at the time of Marx. And no one in the sciences believes that now. One of my favorite authors, Will Durant, likes to say that the problem with the ancient world was that you had very little evidence and you had too many theories to explain that scant evidence. The problem with our current world is that we have too much evidence and we have no theories to explain it, which is why we're consumed with nihilism. It's why our society is committing suicide. We're in an area of history that has this meaning crisis, the most of anyone ever in history, which is why the West is doing degrowth and it's purposely doing all these things to hobble its own development. Humanity is as psychological as it is material. And if you don't give people the psychological needs they have, they start to rebel against their own society. If we don't fulfill people's psychological needs, they're going to start pushing back against the society that failed to impart the meaning to them. The fascinating shift that led to the Axial Age really stems from the creation of coinage. Before this invention, all transactions relied on an IOU system where people didn't have physical currency to trade. Imagine it like this. I'm a banker and you're a farmer. In our little trading world, we'd use IOUs to keep everything in balance. You'd give me flour, and in return, I'd offer you a specific amount of bread. In this setup, being kind to each other was crucial. If I wasn't nice to you, you could easily cut off our trade. This whole system relied on social harmony, as our currency was based on personal relationships and mutual respect. David Graeber explores this beautifully in his book. Now, think about what happens when coinage comes into play. I hand you a coin, and suddenly we don't need to chat or maintain our relationship anymore. The coin acts as hard currency, transforming the dynamics of our interactions. The similarities between this and our world of the internet are really striking. So here's what's wild about the internet. It's not just that you can hop online and order a pizza without leaving your couch, but also you can skip that whole chatting it up with the pizza guy at the corner. We're cutting down on our face-to-face interactions, and while that may sound minor, it's actually a big deal because a lot of the mess that we're dealing with socially in the West right now comes from the fact that people aren't connecting like they used to. Community involvement is down, social support feels weak, and social skills are kind of fading away. The internet's definitely playing a role in this. It allows us to do so many things solo that we don't need to interact with anyone. And while it has its perks, it's important for us to keep an eye on. If we're not careful, we could find ourselves more isolated than ever, which might lead to a lot of social headaches. I see a real connection between what happened with coinage back in the Axial Age and how the internet is shaking things up now. Both Coinage and the internet make it easier for us to do things without having to rely on personal interactions, which has changed the way that we build trust and interact with each other. I really hope that the internet sparks a new philosophical and religious movement, and the correlations here are pretty compelling. You know, if you think about it, 20 years ago, if you wanted to date someone, you had to actually meet them in person. Fast forward to today, and we can just swipe on an app. And if you wanted to plan a vacation back then, you'd head to a travel agent to book everything for you. Now it's as easy as clicking a few buttons online. Managing all those personal relationships used to be a real task. Now, thanks to the internet, so much of the interaction has shifted into the online sphere. No wonder that so many in Gen Z are struggling with social skills. They don't have to engage in the same way anymore. Now, with the emergence of AI, we're looking at an even bigger transformation in how we handle our relationships and our social connections. Just like how Coinage made trust based on IOUs a thing of the past, AI is stepping in to reduce the need for human intermediaries in various social and economic interactions. The shift carries some pretty significant implications for our capitalist economics. While AI may enhance market efficiency, it could also erode the social trust that underpins market economies. Now, we're seeing this firsthand in financial markets, where algorithmic trading is taken over from human traders. It doesn't just change how trades occur, but it also reshapes the essence of price discovery and of market psychology. If we look at this through the lens of Peter Turchin, technological disruptions like these often signal a crisis phase in a secular cycle. So looking at our journey through the parallels between past and present, we're finding ourselves standing on a similar threshold to our ancient ancestors. Just as they faced the challenge of creating new philosophical frameworks to handle their technological revolution, we too have to develop ways of thinking about intelligence, consciousness, and human purpose in an age of artificial minds. The Axial Age teaches us periods of great technological change demand more than just practical solutions. They require profound spiritual and philosophical innovation. Those ancient thinkers didn't simply adapt to Coinage, they reimagined humanity's place in the universe. Today, as AI systems begin to demonstrate capabilities that blur the lines between human and machine intelligence, we face our own need for a philosophical revolution. Perhaps like the ancient Indians who developed new concepts of consciousness, or like the Greeks who found divine truth in mathematics. We too will discover new frameworks for understanding mind, meaning, and morality. The answers may not come easily or quickly. After all, the philosophical systems of the Axial Age took centuries to mature. But as we stand at the dawn of the Axial Age, we can take comfort in knowing that humanity has navigated such transformative moments before. They emerged with deeper wisdom and deeper understanding in facing our future. Past may be our greatest teacher. As we develop machines to match or exceed human intelligence, we must confront the philosophical questions surrounding what it means to be alive, to possess intelligence, to experience consciousness. We also need to consider the rights and responsibilities that accompany these attributes. This inquiry goes beyond mere theory. It carries significant practical consequences. For instance, if we bring conscious machines into existence, do they possess a right to autonomy and to not being owned by other people? Should they have the right to exist without the threat of being powered down? What about the right to participate in voting or to possess property? These are all pressing questions that we must address. The answers will not be straightforward, but it's crucial that we begin contemplating these issues now before we pass the point of no return. Failing to engage in this discourse could lead to a scenario where our creations possess such advanced intelligence that they essentially wield control, and this would pose real risks to humanity's future.